All right, welcome back to Confidence in the Cloud. In this module, we're going to talk about the cloud sweet spot. Is there such a thing?
There is, and it's sweet when you get into the sweet spot.
It is. Ooh, I'm not sure how to take that. Anyway, so the cloud sweet spot. Well, before we start getting into that, we mentioned in the first module that sometimes there's a misconception about cloud, what cloud is, what is cloud versus hosting versus just renting some rack space at an outsourcer. When we say cloud, for anybody who's listening, the IT pros most likely know that already. But let's just revisit it, just to make sure we're on the level playing field here.
Right, so cloud is a collection of online services. They're a bunch of business capabilities that you can make use of on demand, self-service, through a network, and pay for only what you require.
So that's an official?
Well, it's I think it's as a working definition, but officially, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, so they're a U.S. government standards organization, they have a cloud definition. And it starts off with on-demand self-service. So as we use things like online storage, OneDrive, when we require, we can simply ask for it or drag and drop something there. We don't have to go off and procure things. We don't have to go through contracts or change requests. We can simply gain access to it.
Okay, so you don't have the 3-week procurement problems of, calling the management, filling out the form, getting a server put into the rack, have the IT guy configure it the way you want it, and then 3 weeks later you actually find access to it?
Not at all. In some cases, you simply go on with a credit card and you procure that on your own. And we've all heard about those stories about people going home on a Friday night, spinning up some cloud services, and then coming back Sunday with a ready-made cloud service. So on-demand self-service, you don't require an intermediary. Another aspect is ubiquitous, and for us technology people, that's a mouthful.
But, for me, French person, that's a very mouthful.
But having network access, so regardless of where you are, being able to gain access to the service. And that's important, especially in today's day and age where nations and businesses are projecting their know-how, projecting their business around the world. We're in a global economy. You want to service your customers regardless of where they are around the world. You want to provide services for your employees regardless of where they are around the world.
Yeah, it's a good example of that. Actually, I was doing a camp, an Azure camp a couple of weeks ago, and one of our attendees, the company works for, they have stakeholders all over South America, but all of their data is in Toronto. Mm-hmm. So what they were doing before is having the people from South America all connect into the Toronto office through a local VPN concentrator.
Right.
Until that VPN concentrator started being a little flaky. But now what they're looking at is the branch office in the cloud.
Right.
Meaning using Azure services, Azure Virtual Network, and point-to-site VPN and the site-to-site VPN between that branch office, mm-hmm. which they've located in South America, or data center in or South American region. So those stakeholders connect locally to the cloud in South America, and through that connect to their local data center without having to worry about a single point of failure at the concentrator level.
Well, imagine what that improved user experience must be without all that latency.
Yep. And they don't have to worry about where the data is, because the data is still on their network.
Exactly, and that gets us to the next point, is that location-independent resource pooling. What that means is that you can now unbundle the actual hardware from your application development. We that used to develop applications were very, very focused on particular machines, particular storage, particular locations, and it was very, very tightly coupled. Now we can liberate those applications and use resources where they're best suited. And so we can serve up rich media from the cloud. We can do our financial processing in the back end on our on-premise, making sure that the service is best suited for where it's provided.
And when we say about location independent as well, is that a requirement, or not a requirement, but a definition of having your data replicated to different regions, so if you choose to?
You know what? You can look at it that way. You have the ability then to replicate your data and have the availability. So you have flexibility to move that data to where it makes sense and to provide that fault tolerance. Business continuity planning has changed a great deal because of this part of the cloud definition. Now no longer do you think of hot standbys and cold standbys. You can think of just always available data, regardless of
always on.
Always on.
Always on.
The other piece, rapid elasticity. As you require it, you can scale out to what you need. Taking advantage of literally hundreds of thousands of processing cores. And so as you have an increasing demand, we're coming up to Black Friday, all those retailers don't know what's going to happen with their systems. To be able to scale out as you require them is a great capability. And so the NIST cloud definition covers that. And lastly, pay for use. So you only pay for those services that you use. You only consume 5,000 processors. You only pay for 5,000 processors. If you want to get the job done a little faster using 10,000 processors, you can pay a little bit extra and move on from there. But these NIST cloud definitions really provide us a good stepping stone to help demystify the cloud for not only our C-level executives, but also the business. Because we as IT people, when we look to deploy these services, our conversation has changed a little bit. We change from the hardware and the technology aspects to now what's the business enablement? How do we help the business go further?
How do we have?
Well, what I'd like to do is I like to start with these definitions.
Okay.
And so we start off with on-demand self-service. And we ask simple questions that the line of business may be familiar with. So we could talk with HR, for example.
Okay.
And ask HR, how long does it take from the time somebody gets hired, their first day at work, till they get access to all those tools that they require to do their job?
Well, isn't that a function of identity management?
It is indeed a function of identity management and how they distribute that identity management, how much governance and red tape is there.
Okay.
The cloud allows you to almost have self-service for many of those features.
But for those of you in IT in secured environment, that does not change the requirements that you may have in terms of high assurance registration or low assurance registration or even open assurance, sorry, not insurance, but assurance.
Right.
So it's somebody that's like face-to-face with proper documentation and in one place, I had to do a polygraph and a 20-year background check to be registered into their services. So that does not change the way you work. So in terms of an IT professional, you're still needed to do all that work or to set up that infrastructure in those services.
That's right. So you may be required to set up the initial services, to set up the infrastructure to do it, but do you want to have that mundane task of the adds and deletions on a day-to-day basis, and do you want to be that person on the critical path? So this way you can simply say, look, we can distribute that registration to the branch office. Perhaps you have a central office and a branch office. Allow the branch office, a manager there, or HR function to do that enablement instead of having to wait for a central headquarters to do it.
Okay, so kind of the utopia of having the addition and deletion created by the person who actually owns the data as opposed to them putting it into an Excel spreadsheet or into an email and sending it to a manager that'll forward it to the IT pro who's just going to put in the information, then send back the email saying, yeah, it's done.
That's right. It empowers that business unit that's accountable for that. And then we can look through some of these other more business-focused conversations. So how many people are involved with the deployment? When you register a new individual, does it have to go through 5 different hands of approval? Or can you simply automate that?
But that's the same for a server.
Correct.
A server or a service, to deploy a service, how many people are involved in deploying a specific service? So if you're rolling out in terms of a dev test environment for IT professionals and with development teams, deploy a dev test environment. Typically, in the traditional older data center, it's better now with virtualization, but it was, okay, put in the request, somebody scrounge up some servers, rack them up, segregate them, set up everything, and then boom, you're done. Then they do a test. Now it's no longer a pristine environment.
Right. Then
you have to roll it back, and then they do the next test, as opposed to now with cloud services, how many people really need to be involved in the deployment of that environment?
You're exactly right. And the smile that comes across the business leader's face when you say, I can take your acquisition of a new server from 90 days down to minutes, 5 minutes to have a new server acquired. That really excites them because they can bring their new tool, solution, product to market that much faster. And you can imagine, that 90-day period, you can develop a lot of apps in 90 days.
You can. And you're still requiring the knowledge of setting up configuration, your base configuration, your desired configuration management, so your how it ties into System Center and everything else. So you still need that knowledge that the IT Pro provides, except that now at that point the IT Pro is a much more integral part of the solution as opposed to just hands and feet.
That's exactly right. And when you think of some of the mundane tasks that are required when you're setting up a new server, right? So you're installing the software, you're installing the updates, you're configuring. If you can have that ready-made in a common image, then you can add more value to the business and again, not go through the motions of simply getting that baseline up and running. The other area that's a great conversation is this idea of network access. And Pierre, you mentioned it a little bit earlier around having the ability to write once to the cloud and then allowing your community to gain access to that content. Imagine if you have 1,000 users that require video content. So you move from 1,001 accesses because you're providing it and then 1,000 people are asking for it. If you can simply write once to the cloud and then have 1,000 people rely upon the cloud network to gain access to it, you're already taking a big burden off your network infrastructure.
But you still have to worry about using the cloud efficiently, or else you're going to end up with potentially a larger bill at the end of the month because you're paying for what you're using.
You have to make sure that you've considered how you're deploying your services. So you're exactly right. You can't simply say, you know what, I'm going to throw it all over the fence into the cloud and then have that just miraculously take care of everything. You do need to give thought to how you architect your applications and make sure you're taking the best advantage for the capabilities.
Yeah.
Whoops. This clicker is, there we go.
There we go.
So location independence is
Yes.
another one. So business continuity, disaster recovery. We have customers that have been struck by calamity. We've had cables cut. There's been data centers that have burnt down. There are backups that thought were backups and they're blank. So there's a number of these gotchas that have occurred. And moving to the cloud then removes some of these uncertainties.
Well, in the last year alone, there's 2 customers that will remain nameless, but you'll know yourself if you're listening to this. That one have their data center go up in flames.
Right.
And the other one, the data center flooded. So 6 feet of water in the data center. Both of those customers were thinking about potentially looking at the cloud. And now they're wondering why they didn't do it earlier.
That's right. It's sometimes it's that compelling event where you recognize that, hey, you have a single point of failure that causes people to reconsider and consider what the residual risk might be and say, well, you know what, we thought we were protected. We're not. Let's have a second look at what the risk is.
And it addresses a whole bunch of stuff like where is your servers, who has access to it or has physical access to it.
That's right. I think once people start to look at the cloud, they recognize that, hey, it's not simply disappearing into the thing like the meteorological phenomena, the things up in the sky. No, that you have certainty where your data is. You know that your data is only yours and is you maintain ownership in the Microsoft cloud. So those things people then come quickly aware of.
And it's not being scanned for keywords, and it's not being looked at for
not being used for third-party use, is not being used for advertising, all those things that this broad term of cloud sometimes causes confusion. This last piece is often important as well. I've had a number of conversations with large data center hosters themselves, people that run their own private cloud in Canada, and they are constrained. Real estate is at a premium. There's simply not enough floor space to drop another rack in. Or perhaps even there was one customer that couldn't get more power from the local power authority. They just simply couldn't get more electricity into the substation. And so that constraint really then helped them decide on what workloads could they move over to the public cloud environment.
That last point, actually, now that you mention it, translates really, really, I think, in my opinion, may even have a bigger impact for small and medium businesses. because small and medium businesses may not have the resources to have a server room with a raised floor and managed or conditioned climate inside there. Typically, you end up with the server under the receptionist desks. So security's out the window to start with and all of that. So using, you don't have to worry about the square footage. And for a very small shop, the $150 a square foot real estate, and I'm not talking about Toronto real estate at $150 a square foot, but it becomes really critical.
It does, and I think it also speaks to this idea of it's not an all or nothing conversation. You can protect those systems that you have internally. Perhaps you've done a lot of customization of your code. When you think of financial management systems or shipping and billing, those systems, there's a lot of bespoke or customized code that's in those environments. Moving those workloads to the cloud can often be a challenge, but simple workloads like media streaming or blob storage or backups, that can go off into the cloud services. So you can have the best of both worlds and make use of those resources that are available to you.
Okay. And rapid elasticity, we mentioned that as one of the last points. What are the main benefits or main characteristics of rapid elasticity?
Well, in the public cloud, you literally have access to hundreds of thousands of cores. And you also have tens of thousands of customers that are making use of those cores. And everybody's business cycles a little bit differently. The retail sector has a very, very busy time around the Friday after U.S. Thanksgiving. You'll have the Black Friday. You'll have taxation agencies will be busy in the spring. You'll have academic institutions are busy in the fall. So there's different times of the year when people have different increased workloads. And what that allows you to do is to spread that horsepower across a variety of different customers. And so if you have a seasonal requirement, a seasonal capability, this rapid elasticity allows you to burst out and make use of those cores when you require them. If you're a small emerging enterprise, let's say you're a startup and you're not sure how successful you'll be, well, the cloud allows you to
start small
and grow explosively. And we've seen that through customers across Canada that have been able to do that. And finally, it helps you on pay-per-use. So only pay for what you use. So if you have seasonal staff or if you have peak periods and low periods, you only pay for what you require. So you don't have a big upfront investment of hardware. You can simply make use of the cloud services as you require them.
Yep. So we've talked about the definition, and now we understand exactly what it is and what it isn't. But there's a lot of misconception out there. Right. So let's look at a few of those, because I'm sure the viewers at home, the IT pros in the shops across the country or across the globe, often if they approach the cloud conversation, will get from either their management or somebody within their environment that does not understand it properly, will get something like, oh no, I'm going to lose ownership of my data, or oh no, something else is going to happen because of those misconceptions.
Right.
So let's look at some of those common myths and misconceptions that we have.
Well, I've collected a few of them. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the top ones that tend to come out. I think the first myth, it's all internet. So coming from consumer cloud services, a lot of cloud services providers have said, look, you're going to do everything on the internet. You can't do anything on-premise. You can't do anything from a hosted cloud OS provider. That's a myth. You can do cloud on your terms. You can host your own private cloud and manage it with the same characteristics. You can have an outsourced cloud. Not all clouds are equal. Consumer clouds have different licensing agreements and different data privacy requirements than the enterprise cloud.
Different SLAs.
And again, in the Microsoft Enterprise Cloud, your data is always your data, and you'll never lose ownership of your data. So you can define how long that data is kept, who has access to data, and how that data is protected.
So can we talk about this a little later, or can we mention it now? Like the data that's on a disk, and that disk or that container gets recycled, what happens to that data?
That data is protected with BitLocker. And so, when that disk is decommissioned, let's say there's a failure, that disk is decommissioned, it's BitLockered, and you can't get access to that data. So it's protected, it's encrypted so that you can't have that scenario of a tape bouncing off the back of a truck as it goes to be recycled.
And I thought I heard Mike Rozinovich at TechEd last May saying that, and be free to tell me I'm wrong, but that the drives themselves are actually like degaussed and destroyed before they leave our data center.
They're protected and made sure that they're sanitized so that the data
so they're absolutely sanitized.
They're sanitized to make sure that, hey, there's no risk of that data leakage in that manner.
Okay, so you'll never lose your data. Perfect.
You can mix and match cloud services. So you can decide to have that first part of your shopping cart application, the rich images and the video, to be in the cloud. You can use the shopping cart and put that in the back end. You can pick and mix those and do them at runtime and execution time, and have a variety of different ways to connect those up. So it's not an all or nothing conversation. We don't arbitrary pile data.
What does that mean, piling data?
Well, you know, the way that it was positioned at this one conference was we all have that linen closet at home where we fill it up with sheets and towels and it gets full, and we end up just throwing the towel in the top and then shutting the door quickly and hoping that nothing spills out. And there's a sense in some communities that that's what cloud providers do, is just pile the data in a big heap, and then we rustle through it to find it back for the customers. And there's nothing further from the truth. It's simply from a compliance, from an efficiency, from a governance perspective, we wouldn't be able to provide the services as efficiently, as effectively, if we weren't able to direct you to your data and know exactly where your data is.
Okay, so we always know where
the
logs
data
are
is
stored, where everything is stored.
And we provide notice to the customer where that data is stored, so you know where your primary and your backup sites are. And you can actually ask for restrictions on data leaving particular regions as well.
Okay, so when you set up geo-replicated data, you get to pick which other region you're actually going to replicate to.
That's correct. This idea of data tsunami response to warrants, people think that we're uninitiated when it comes to those lawful requests for data, and that we simply say, well, here, take it all and run with it. And unfortunately, I think in the early days of internet service providers or hosted services, there was one court case where law enforcement came and took a server, a single server, and were able to try to extricate data from that. When you look at a modern data center with containers, with literally thousands of processors, moving data amongst containers, replicating across others, even if you grabbed a container and could do so, which you can't, you wouldn't have assurance that that data would be on there. So this is one of those myths that if you take a look behind the scenes, you recognize that you can't simply lift up these 100,000 processor data centers to do forensics on.
So for company X who's using cloud services on Microsoft Azure, there's not a server or a rack of storage out there with their name with on a piece of tape in front of it that they can grab.
Not at all. And what they might find is that their workload moves from server to server throughout the day as things move about.
So that also leads into the next one: provider staff to browse that data.
Yeah, you know, when you take a look at the layered defenses that we provide within our cloud, you know, first off, each of our administrators, the ratio of administrators to servers is about 1 to 3,000. So ask yourself the question, what's the ratio of administrators to servers in your organization? And we found that a well-performing organization in Canada, about 1 to 150. So there's an order of magnitude difference there. Then what we've done is we have minimal access and enforce minimal access within our environment. So what that means is the administrators stay at the least privilege level. When they need to escalate their privilege, it's a manual process where they escalate into a privilege mode, and it's time constrained. They're only allowed to do that action, then they must drop off.
And it's time constrained, but somebody can't elevate themselves.
Someone can't. You're right. It's manually controlled and ruthlessly audited. And so the administrators start at the lowest level of almost the hardware administration. To move into Azure, it's a manual process, ruthlessly audited. To move to a workload, manual process, ruthlessly audited. To move to a tenant, again, and so you see all the gates and doors that people have to go through to get there. So there's just no way to be able to do that. Likewise for law enforcement, a lot of speculation out there in the web around things that are happening. We're furious about the allegations that this happens. This does not happen. Law enforcement does not browse the enterprise cloud. And the last one The cloud will displace all other technologies. No, this is a very additive opportunity for organizations. You'll continue to reap the benefits of that investment you've made in IT, and then the cloud will complement that and allow you to go faster into those particular work areas.
Yeah, because I hear that all the time saying, well, we're not ready to throw everything into the cloud. Well, nobody ever told you needed to. Use the cloud where it's appropriate, when it's appropriate.
That's right.
Those technologies.
That's right. And then so what I've found is that it's often useful to talk about cloud changes how IT is done. So you start off with your current data center, right? And so you're familiar with operating your data center. You've reached some capacity limits or you want to try the cloud. Well, you might use some public cloud services. So it's an and conversation, your data center, public cloud.
Okay.
We talked about some of the resource constraints around not having enough floor space, not having enough power. So having a container to complement your data center provides a great capability. And now we have that great appliance from Dell, the Cloud Platform Server, that allows you to do so in a packaged Azure-like environment. You can move to a shared services organization. We've seen many governments do this, or even logistics firms with third-party logistics firms that combine those services for common communities.
Okay.
We have outsourced providers that provide cloud services or cloud-like services on behalf of their customers. We have localized cloud environments, and this includes our Cloud OS partners. We have Cloud OS partners here in Canada that provide Azure services and Office 365 services.
Yeah, using the Azure Pack.
Using the Azure Pack, so you get the best of both worlds for those particular requirements. Perhaps you have a little bit more customization that you require over and above public cloud, while that Cloud OS provider can accommodate those customizations.
But on that one, for the Cloud OS providers, it remains on, for anybody that has residency requirements and sovereignty requirements, that remains on Canadian soil.
That's right, and it provides a meaningful safeguard for those people that have those additional requirements.
Yeah, and for those of you at home who may not be in Canada with us, the Cloud OS partners is as far as I know, a global initiative. So they would be Cloud OS partners in your geography.
That's exactly right. And then finally, we have the community cloud, which brings together communities. So financial services, energy, oil and gas, and others will find that they have consistent requirements and they can bring things together. And now you say to yourself, well, John, that's 7 different environments that I have to manage, and all with that new cadence around frequent updates, the 300 updates in Azure. How do I manage around that? Well, you manage by taking a cloud approach across your various environments. So having a common identity across those environments so that you have a common regime for being able to share that. And Active Directory is in many cases the identity provider of choice across those domains.
So you got Active Directory, Microsoft Windows Active Directory on-premise, and synced to a Microsoft Azure Active Directory in the cloud.
Exactly. And so you're able then to mediate those identities of devices, people, and applications across your different environments. So that's a common platform that you can rely upon to bring these together.
Okay.
Common management. So you want to have a single pane of glass, which you manage all these different services, regardless of where they're located, and be able to have visibility regardless of what the workload is, be it a Windows Server workload, a Linux workload, whatever workload you have on Azure, you can manage it consistently across the board.
And I'm really happy that you bring this up because of the common management for IT professionals. They don't want to have to, if they're already using System Center in their environment, they don't want to have to relearn a new management and monitoring kind of suite in order to do the cloud computing part and have System Center internally. So by having that all linked together with a single identity or common identity, I wouldn't say, it allows them to use the tools that they already know, so they could continue using whatever tools they have.
That's right. And so that helps them with agility. That helps them come to up to speed much more quickly because, hey, this is like old hat. So what they've done on premise, they can now apply that capability to those cloud services.
And that's not only Windows. It's not only System Center. All things open source we're an open architecture, so Puppet and Chef and all these things in order to manage everything inside and outside of your traditional data center.
Exactly. And that leads us right to the last point is around common platforms. And I put the S on the end. It says there's no S on this, it's singular, but it's common platforms. And it's to choose your spots. So you may decide that your application development environment is all based upon Windows Server. And so that may be one platform that you harmonize around and put the cloud interfaces on. You may use somebody else's customer relationship management product. But if you put that cloud interface around it and make sure everything talks well to those platforms, then that helps you then manage the rapidly changing cadence that we see now in this increasingly cloud world.
Okay. Well, so that's great. One of the things, and we've talked about elastic capacity, we've talked about pay-per-use, we talked about other things. Throughout my interactions with IT professionals across the country, one of the things that comes up a lot is, what workload do I have that would be a good candidate to go to the cloud?
Right.
So the slide I've put together here is one of those where it's kind of like a very high-level snapshots of the computing patterns that are a good candidate for the cloud.
Right.
So something that's on and off. So you're running a system. I take an example here, let's say as an election.
Right.
So during the leading up, the month before, leading up, and the election, and a little bit after, those systems are up and they're running, and everybody's using them, and people are looking up the listing, making sure they're on it. But then once the election is done, until there's the next election, those systems get mothballs.
That's right.
But they still have to sit there, and they still have to be managed. You still have capital expenditures on them. So this is one of these things where cloud computing would be a good candidate.
That's right.
It's not used, shut it down, still all configured, still in your cloud subscription, but just not paying for it because it's not running.
That's right.
Growing fast, you mentioned startups. You start with a good idea. You put it online. Somebody famous tweets about it. And all of a sudden, it takes off. Well, if you had not planned for that in a traditional sense, so as you mentioned, where the venture capitals used to give you money to build up that infrastructure,
right.
Well, you don't have to do that anymore. So that's another one. Growing fast, very, very good computing pattern to be looking at. Unpredictable bursting. It's unpredictable. You manage or you plan for that 50,000 transaction a month, and all of a sudden you get the 150, 200,000 transaction, and then in a traditional data center, you'd either buy more really, really quickly, as quick as you can, but what if it doesn't last?
That's right.
So you've put in all this infrastructure, and you're not going to need it again for a long time.
Well, a great example is a social media call-out, right? Something goes viral on social media for a short burst. Perhaps there's some event like a music event where you have a selfie taken, or the power goes out at a sporting event, and you manage to have good product placement, and all of a sudden you have all this traffic coming to your website to find out more or to see what's going on. That's unpredictable bursting, and allowing the cloud to be able to manage that on your behalf allows you to get ahead of the curve and really benefit from some of the unique natures of the new business environment.
Yeah, and that's specifically the elastic capacity. Grows when you need it, and drops when you don't. Which leads me to the last one. The last computing model or pattern is that predictable bursting. That's
right.
The Black Friday, like 3 weeks before Christmas, when every IT pro realizes that we forgot to buy a present for Christmas for somebody,
right.
And we all go online. Well, that's the predictable bursting. They know about it. All of the retailers, the online retailers, I'm trying not to use specific brands here.
Right.
They know about it. So 3 weeks before or a week before Black Friday, they'll start ramping up the number of instances online. And the week after, they'll drop them back down until Christmas or until the next holiday and it's recurring, and they know it because it's human nature. So those are the predictable bursting.
Exactly.
So that's one thing, is the patterns that we have. The other thing that sometimes I find is a bit of a misconception is the computing model. In a traditional data center, so if you look on the left, you are responsible for the networking, the storage, the servers, the virtualization, the OS that's on there, the middleware, the runtime data, and applications. And I forgot to put the user. You're always, across all of these, you're always responsible for the user. But in an infrastructure as a service, so IaaS, will take care of the networking, the storage, the server, and the virtualization. Everything else on top of that, it's like if it was your own, well, it is your own server, your own data. It's just not running on a physical server or running inside your own virtualized environment.
Exactly.
It's running on ours. That also brings me to another misconception. If it's an IaaS and you have a virtual machine running, whether it's Windows or Linux, it's your responsibility to patch it and manage it.
Oh, indeed.
And that's something that people forget. They think, I'm putting it on the cloud so I don't have to manage it. Not going to happen. If it's infrastructure as a service and it's a virtual machine, anything above the virtualization layer is your responsibility. Platform as a service for on the other end, we'll take care of the networking, storage, server, virtualization, OS, middleware, and runtime. So what you need to worry about is your data. That can be on the cloud or can be local. We can be hybrid. The application itself, and, of course, the users. So that's a perfect example of, let's say, Azure websites or SQL Azure, where we take care of everything else. We take care, on that particular one, we do patch the machine when it's required and on very, very strict protocols for that. And then software as a service, which is the last computing model, basically you only have to worry about the users, giving access to the users to the service, and we manage everything else behind the scenes.
That's true, and I think your point's well taken around the infrastructure as a service with patching. I think across all those models, you really need to look at the security capabilities that are there. And even in software as a service, you need to light up those security capabilities. So things, features like data loss prevention, where you're able to configure the Exchange server so that it can block credit card numbers, people from sending credit card numbers across. That's a configuration that's available. It's a security feature that you need to light up. So across the board, you can't simply say, I'm not going to worry about security. No, you need to look at security, but perhaps in a different light.
Well, speaking of security, security kind of leads me into our next module, which is going to be to talk about risk, trust, and confidence, or what you do about those risks. So when we come back in the next module, we're going to drill right into that with risk assessment, trust and confidence, and what action or taken action based on those risks and those assessments. So see you when we come back.